So as C mentioned, we decided to take the content from Reading Skills for Today's Adults and use it as sort of the basis for a professional development initiative that we started with our first cohort of, called the EdTech Makerspace. And that cohort is in the process of wrapping up. We started in mid-July, and we are in sort of the last week, and there'll be some trickling in of things over the next couple of weeks. But the notion of the EdTech Makerspace is really designed to kind of solve two challenges that we know exist within adult education. One is how do we get more mobile-friendly content into the hands of learners? As C showed, the Reading Skills for Today's Adults site is a website. You can access it on a mobile phone, and you can read the stories on a mobile phone. But then when we know, as we've seen over the past few months, that many of our learners are mobile dependent for their internet access, things like the supplement become a little bit more challenging to get into the hands of learners because it's unlikely they have a printer at home. I know lots of people don't have printers at home, and just the notion of downloading a Word doc. So while those are great resources when we're working face-to-face in person, it's a little bit more challenging when we're working remotely. So thinking about ways that we can take existing content and get it into the hands of learners in ways that make sense. And then for educators, thinking about meaningful and seamless ways to actually integrate these resources into their instruction. So part of that is having the content itself and having the resources available and easy to use. But part of that is also understanding like how to use those tools that you're using for creating content and for delivering it. And so again, the sort of result of these two issues and what we designed and led our first cohort of the past 6 weeks is what's called the EdTech Makerspace. And the notion of the EdTech Makerspace is taking high quality open content like Reading Skills for Today's Adults, which is openly licensed. And what that means is they have set licensing in a manner that it clearly states what people are allowed to or not allowed to do with it. And one of those things is providing attribution, which we'll talk about in a second. And a second part of that is that you can't use it commercially. And so all of the resources that we're developing out of the EdTech Makerspace ultimately become freely available as well because of the original license from the content that we had. Another part of the EdTech Makerspace is to identify these EdTech tools that we know educators are using, that we know can help to generate more mobile-friendly content for students. And so taking this existing content and creating resources using specific EdTech tools that fit the activities that might be done and, again, fit ultimately a learner being able to access it independently. And then mixing those things together, training educators on how to use those tools while using that content so that they are creating shareable, consistent resources that are mobile friendly using high quality content that we know is open. I am over the moon excited about how this has gone. And we started with Reading Skills for Today's Adults because, as C mentioned, they have that fantastic supplement that was developed as part of their update. So we knew there was like vocabulary in there for every story and vocabulary activities and then language activities, then speaking activities, and then the comprehension, multiple choice assessment, and then a writing activity. And so from those 5 different activities that are built into the supplement, we focused on 2 specifically because the nature of the activity lent itself well to specific tools that we know are easy to use for educators and students and easy to create resources. And so with those vocabulary words that are part of every single story, we basically took teachers and had them learn how to use Quizlet, which is a free tool that allows you to create study decks on anything. A lot of it is vocabulary oriented. And so teachers got training in how to use Quizlet, on how to make their Quizlets shareable, on how you can sort of see here, provide attribution when you are using someone else's content. And then sharing that link as part of, we have this massive spreadsheet that basically has over 1,000 URLs now of the various resources that teachers have created. And so, these Quizlet study sets allow learners to engage in multiple formats with the vocabulary. So there's learning it through flashcards, there's writing activities, there's matching, which is a game. There's actually an assessment once they've sort of really immersed themselves in the word at the end. And they get that feedback, and what's nice about all of these activities is there's leaderboards. And so like the game, which is matching, which is kind of like concentration, they can continually sort of work with the words and try to best their own best score and see how it is within the leaderboard. So again, mobile friendly for students, something that students can use on their own. And then the second activity that we felt was appropriate and lent itself well to tools that we know educators are using is the comprehension assessment at the end, which is a multiple choice quiz. And so what we did was take those quiz questions, first trained teachers in creating quizzes with Google Forms, in strategies for sharing those, and understanding how to weight items, and understanding how to indicate which answer is correct. Again, also providing attribution within the quiz, and generating these comprehension quizzes that a student can take independently of whether or not they're even in formal education. So if they access this library, they can immediately get feedback on the quiz and just read at will. The third tool that we used was, okay, great, we've created all these quiz study sets and we've created all these Google Forms quizzes, but now we have a story, a vocabulary study set, and a quiz, all sort of 3 different URLs. How do we bring those together? And so a super powerful tool that I love is called Wakelet. And Wakelet is something that allows you to pull together various things into one place. And so as you can see here, this is a Wakelet, what's called a collection. And within that collection is the vocabulary practice with directions. So this would launch the Quizlet, is the reading from Reading Skills for Today's Adults, and then at the bottom here is the reading comprehension quiz. So it's all in one place, and suddenly these Wakelets are very shareable as well. And the big piece of the EdTech Makerspace is, as we're designing these things, really carefully thinking about, when creating these OER, making sure that you're designing things with others in mind. A lot of open education resources, they're great, they're like really intense lessons, but at first it takes someone forever to even understand the gist of a lesson. And if there's lots of links in there that say go to someone's Kahoot account where there's a login that someone's not going to have, suddenly teachers are having to recreate all of these elements of a lesson. And so the EdTech Makerspace really focuses on designing with others in mind and sort of looking at 3 questions. Could other instructors use this resource as is? How can I make sure that this resource is easy to access and it's easy for instructors to customize? And then ultimately with the licensing, what am I allowed to do with the content being used, and being careful with that. And so what we've done is, in addition to creating those Google Forms quizzes, teachers have also created a copy link. So one of the things we'll be adding to the resource page on the Reading Skills for Today's Adults site is basically a document that has all of these assets that teachers can access, copy, and make their own. So that Google Forms quiz right now, the student gets the feedback. Nobody else is going to see that feedback, but the teacher could perfectly make a copy of that assessment. We provide the link for them to be able to do so, and they could assign that Google Forms quiz as is, or they could take the Wakelet and copy it, and then switch out the quiz so that it's their Wakelet with the same content and the Google Forms quiz that they're going to get the reporting on. And so we've taught teachers how to create shareable Wakelets that others can copy and sort of add their own. And again, the most important part when we're talking about open education resources is making sure that folks understand licensing and understand what's appropriate. And we wanted to give teachers the opportunity to sort of celebrate what they've done. And so on all of these Wakelets, they get to put their name on it and say, like, they created this using this open content, and the license remains the same, because that license that Southwest ABE put on Reading Skills for Today's Adults is the license. And so the end result is, and we'll have these in mid-September, 345 Wakelets that include the Quizlet, the story, and the quiz. all of these can be customized, and then I'm sort of playing with an app builder that we've used for other tools as well, so that there'll also be a student-facing mobile app that a student can download, and then they have access to those. And what's nice about the app is we'll be, the teachers right now are tagging all the content by topics, and so all of them will be searchable by topics. So the student could search for readings that are at level on topics that are of interest to them. And if you want to learn more, and I'll send this after I close out and Xavier starts, but we do have a webinar on Thursday where we're going to do the big reveal of all this content and how you can access that. It's about a month from today. We're going to be sort of going over all the content, making sure it's accurately done before we go for the live launch. I'll also share a link in the chat where you can go to the EdTech Makerspace page. We do have some samples of the Wakelets that teachers have created, and that is it.
Jeff, there are two questions. Xavier's wondering if there's going to be another EdTech Makerspace coming in the coming year.
In the coming year, definitely.
I certainly hope so.
What we're trying to figure out is, you know, we have this gift of reading skills for today's adults, right? It's great content that's already done. So step one is polling, and actually I've got to figure out how to sort of reach out to the broader community, and feel free to use the chat to, if you have any ideas. We want to find sort of really comprehensive content that we can do sort of an initiative like this, where it's openly licensed, free content that is pretty comprehensive and vetted, and then we can take it and, you know, again, match the tools to the content and the types of activities you want students to be doing, and then build the training around that. So,
yeah. So any content areas that you know right offhand that you want to address next?
I know ESL is the biggest. So if there's, you know, open, you know, I know like Literacy Minnesota has some really great content that they've created. I don't know if they've put on Creative Commons licensing, but I know they've created like the ESL Story Bank and things along those lines. So there's ESL is a biggie because of the lack of resources in there. But I will say the Reading Skills for Today's Adults Library, even some of the people in our cohort, they are using RSTA with their ESL students.
And do students need to download Wakelet?
Nope. It's completely mobile friendly. They can access it. They can view it. It halts if they download the app, which is free. Because if they have it, then anything that's shared with them, you know, they can add to their own library. But what's cool about Wakelet is you can assign through Google Classroom as a teacher. And so you can, if you're using Google Classroom or even Remind, it's very shareable through the sort of modes that we know that adult educators are using.
That's great. So in the interest of giving, I'd like to give Xavier a full 20 minutes here, but yet there's a very important question from Rachel Riggs in the chat. So Jeff, if you wouldn't mind answering Rachel in the chat while Xavier is taking over here, that'd be great. And thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, in the chat?
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Perfect, okay. I'll do it in the chat.
Welcome and thank you, Xavier, for joining us. Can't wait to hear what you're doing with all this stuff.
Thank you, Jen. It's a real honor to get to be on this webinar. I've learned so many new tech skills and great resources from Jeff, and certainly from the Reading Skills for Today's Adults, and participants who are on this call, like Rachel Riggs and others who've presented previously. So it's my pleasure to get to be here. And so I wanted to talk about pretty much continuing on from what Jeff had shared about the EdTech Makerspace and the open educational resources that have been coming out of that and been created, and how I'm thinking at the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia to integrate those into our instruction, as well as our professional development and volunteer engagement. So just a little bit about the Literacy Council of Northern Virginia. We're a community-based nonprofit adult education organization, and we have several different types of academic programs. We have beginning English language and literacy classes. We have a family learning program that's English contextualized in a family literacy type of course. We also have skills-based classes that are conversation or writing or intro to academic studies. as well as destination workforce programs that are sometimes employer-based, always focused on job readiness or just fast-tracking an advancement in the workforce, other times leading to an industry credential. And we offer a lot of different support services. We have student advisors who are volunteers. We have supplemental tutoring, and we've been in the distance learning space for some time, especially with CEL-Ed, but also with others, certainly during this pandemic. So I think for us at LCNV, some of the challenges that we're facing during these times in particular is, one, opportunities for independent student learning. Also resources to differentiate. I mean, I think that's always a challenge for educators. And then also in this day and age, how to upskill our instructors for teaching remotely. And for our instructors, you know, we have a small number of paid teachers, but we have many more volunteers who teach, assist, or tutor. And because of COVID, not all of them were able to continue with us in an instructional capacity. So trying to think of ways to, especially as a nonprofit, keep our volunteer base healthy and engaged and able to work with us in a meaningful way. And that's where the reading skills for today's adults articles have been huge. It's such a benefit for us in the different types of opportunities that they've made available. So just to touch on those opportunities for independent student learning, our organization, although a community-based one, does receive federal funding through WIOA and IELCE, which in the state of Virginia is the Integrated English Language and Civics Education program. And as part of that, we do have to demonstrate how we are implementing standards-based instruction. And in the state of Virginia, one way that we demonstrate that is through using certain standards and action observation tools that list out certain core actions that aren't necessarily seen in every single class, but hopefully are seen in aggregate pretty regularly in our classes. And this one in particular about building on and developing students' language knowledge and skills is one that is kind of hard for us to do. And particularly with regards to offering access to a broad range of level appropriate texts for sustained independent reading. And from all the great things that C mentioned and Jeff mentioned, those resources are helping us, particularly in these times, to be able to provide that access. One, for our teachers, but then especially for our students. So if you'll permit me for 1 second, I'll exit out of these slides and show some of the ways that we've been doing that and how we're hoping to incorporate more of the EdTech makerspace materials in support of this. So for us, one way that we have tried to recommend a lot of readings for supplemental readings for our instructors is in 2 different ways generally. One is through Google Docs and listing by the different textbooks that we might be using, kind of going unit by unit. Here are some supplemental readings, either above level or below level, just to help differentiate so that teachers can save a little bit on time on not having to just use the book or having to be solely responsible for finding these other stories online. So sometimes as Jeff mentioned, we pull from Literacy Minnesota and their free stories. We've been recommending reading skills for today's adults for quite a while as well. But now with the EdTech Makerspace and the resources that I've been fortunate to be able to help create, as well as some of the participants here today, we're gonna start recommending those ones as well. And so just to show how we're gonna be promoting that with our teachers, let me show you a Padlet that we've been kind of adding to as time has gone on. And this one is from our recent summer semester that we did conduct online. And it has a lot of different things, tips, PD offerings, stuff about Zoom. But let me just zoom in here. So just as an example of some of the ways that we'll incorporate these OERs, this section on health readings, you know, I try to add to it, but teachers as well can add to it. Here, we're going to be able to put in, if it's about health, here are some different types of readings that you might consider recommending to your students to do just outside of class on their own or incorporate into class. And just to click on a few of these links here, it goes to those resources that Jeff had mentioned. the Wakelet page that students, again, could use on their smartphones, or if they have other mobile or computer devices they could access. And then things like the ones from Unite for Literacy, which, if you're not aware, has an entire section that's about COVID-related books. And while you can read the text, you can hear it as well in English, and you can even hear a translated version in a lot of different languages: Arabic, Farsi, Vietnamese, Urdu, many other ones. You can hear these books read aloud in those other languages too. So we regularly recommend that to our instructors too. And then also Bow Valley College, which is another one of our favorites at LCNV. So coming back now to our slides. For us, that's one kind of small way as a staff we will be supporting our teachers to just recommend some of the great things that are out there to help with that sustained independent reading. And also too, I should pause here and say that the supplements that go with the reading skills for today's adults, we have volunteer tutors who work one-on-one, for whom these will be perfect resources. And I'm happy to talk more about how we're thinking to do that in the breakout rooms. But continuing on, another way that we're hoping to integrate these open educational resources is for flipped learning. At LCNV, we do not currently use an LMS. We're exploring it, but we haven't made that leap just yet. But even just using the Wakelet pages, that will provide an opportunity to assign students pre-work, where they're gonna, as you saw, they'll be able to study the vocabulary, read the story, check their comprehension, and then with those written prompts, those discussion prompts that are already in the RSTA supplements, teachers can have this flipped approach, this blended approach, to just further enhance their instruction. And for those who are wondering how might flipped learning work when everything is run entirely online and remotely, I'll just highlight Helene Marshall's work. She's based up in New England, and she has written a fair bit about this model that she calls SOFLA, or synchronous online flipped learning approach. And when you get these slides after today's webinar, you'll be able to click those links to watch a video of her talking about it, as well as read some things that she's written and the different steps that she kind of lays out for taking a flipped learning approach. But now I wanted to talk about some of the other types of resources that LCNV is hoping to use to upskill our instructors using Jeff's EdTech Makerspace model, or rather inspiration from his approach and model, to upskill and also to re-engage some of our volunteers. So before I briefly mentioned those story banks from Literacy Minnesota, which are incredible. And as you can see, they're two different story banks written for different levels of ESL. And when you go to their website, they do ask you to provide information before you can download it. But once you've downloaded it, you'll find things like this one, which for this story from Max Has a Job. They've fleshed it out. It's not just stories, but like the reading skills for today's adults, there's some pre-reading activities, then there's a reading, and because it's for beginning level, there's picture or photo scaffolding to help with the vocabulary. There's some basic comprehension questions, as well as some listening discrimination tasks or phonemic awareness tasks. And they have separate what they call literacy workstations documents that then help with making words or working on word order and making sentences, and even have some more expanded fleshed out vocabulary resources that you can use. And so our thoughts then, we're reaching out to Literacy Minnesota to find out to what extent these are Creative Commons licensed. But we're hoping that we can take these PDF documents and make them into interactive Google Slides. And I might not have time to show them in this main session, so if you want to join me in the breakouts, we can play with some of these together. But you'll see that this one, it's taken the great resource that's already there and put it into a Google slide where these things, students on their phones, or I as a teacher, if I'm presenting over Zoom or some other video conferencing platform, can physically move these different things to put these words or sentences together. And same thing with these with the create the sentences, just adapting it for the online space, which has been a challenge for our teachers. Our teachers, are on a journey of learning how to teach remotely, but it helps tremendously to have some pre-made resources and activities that are level appropriate that they can take and use right away in their class, and can give them ideas for what ways they can work on decoding skills or phonemic awareness or what have you. So what's next for LCNV? My hope is that, especially for those volunteers who aren't able to teach online, but would still like to be involved in some way, is to really try to replicate, to some extent, Jeff's and CrowdEd Learning's EdTech Makerspace approach, and use, if we can, the Literacy Minnesota story banks, if not some other resources, to, as he had explained, use things like Quizlet for the vocabulary, Google Forms for checking comprehension, maybe even Flipgrid for some asynchronous speaking practice, or Jamboard, Wakelet, Google Slides, and Flippity. And these ones I have an example story and these related activities that I can share when we have more time. But I will pause here to see what's going on in the chat and if there are questions.